The wind cut across the Dakota plains like it was searching for someone to punish, lifting dust and old pain into the air. Maria Dawson stood alone at the edge of the abandoned railway platform, holding a thin suitcase that felt heavier than it looked. Inside it were a worn Bible, a change of clothes, and the last pieces of a life that had burned away 3 weeks earlier. Her husband was gone, her little boy was gone. The fire had taken them both in one cruel night and left her with nothing but breath in her lungs and grief that never slept. The hunger inside her was not just for food. It was for safety, for a place that would not vanish in smoke or close its door when pity ran dry. She had walked and ridden wagons until the rails brought her to Whistling Creek, a town whispered about as small enough to forget you, but kind enough to let you begin again. Standing there now, Maria did not know if those whispers were truth or just another lie people told to survive. Across the road, the saloon doors swung open, spilling laughter and smoke into the afternoon air. Men leaned on the railings, boots crossed, eyes slow and curious. Maria pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. A widow with no ring, no family, and no roof was an easy target. Still, she lifted her chin and stepped forward. She needed work, any work, scrubbing floors, washing dishes, anything that bought her a meal and a place to sleep. The town watched her in silence, not cruel, not kind, just heavy, like everyone was carrying something they did not want to name. She felt it in the way eyes followed her and then looked away too fast. Whistling Creek had secrets, and she was walking straight into them. The general store was her first stop. Dust clung to the windows, and the sign creaked in the wind. Inside, a thin man with crooked glasses stacked flour sacks. The bell rang when she entered, sharp and loud. He turned, startled. "Looking for supplies?" he asked. "No, sir," Maria said softly. "I'm looking for work, anything." The man hesitated, then sighed. "I'm sorry, work is scarce. Things are complicated right now." She nodded. She had heard those words before. She thanked him and stepped back outside, the ache in her stomach tightening like a fist. That was when she heard the wagon. It rolled slow down the road, wheels grinding against dirt. The driver was broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low. Even before he stopped, Maria felt the weight of his gaze. When the wagon halted beside her, she saw a face carved by sun and hard years, lines earned from land that demanded everything and gave little back. "You need a place to go?" he asked. "I'm not asking for charity," Maria replied, stepping back. "I didn't say you were," he said calmly. "I asked a question." His eyes were dark blue, steady and sharp. Not gentle, not cruel, just firm, a man built from solitude. She felt exposed under that look. "I'm just passing through," she said. He studied her. "Doesn't look like passing through. Looks like searching." Her spine stiffened. "And what would you know about that?" The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Because I'm searching too." Before she could ask what he meant, the sheriff stepped out of his office, waving. "Colton, you're late." So that was his name, Colton. The sheriff glanced at Maria. "This is Mrs. Dawson." "Widow?" the sheriff asked, plain and direct. "Yes," she said, the words still sharp in her chest. Colton cleared his throat. "Sheriff, just show me the candidates so we can finish this." "Candidates?" Maria echoed. The sheriff sighed. "Colton Hayes owns Hayes Ridge, the biggest ranch around. He's looking for a wife." Maria stared. "A wife, not for love." Colton met her eyes. "For practicality." "For what?" she asked. "For an heir," he said simply. "I need a son." The words hit her harder than the cold. "You're choosing a wife like hiring a hand." "I'm offering a home," Colton said. "Food, safety, in exchange for a child." Her heart pounded. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to leave, but she had not eaten since yesterday. She had slept in a freight shed the night before. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you know loss," he said. And people who know loss understand what it means to keep something alive. The sheriff stepped in. "You don't have to decide now." Quote. But Maria barely heard him. The offer followed her like a shadow as the wagon rolled away. She told herself she would refuse. She had her pride. She had her grief. She had her memory of love. That night, she slept behind a barn, the cold biting deep. And for the first time, she prayed not for answers, but for survival. Morning came hard and pale. Hunger drove her back into town, door after door closing in her face. By noon, her strength was fading. When the sheriff offered her a ride to Hayes Ridge, she hesitated only a moment before nodding. The ranch appeared like a kingdom rising from the land. Fences stretched wide. Cattle moved like dark waves. And there stood Colton Hayes, solid and waiting. When he spoke again, his voice was firm. "My offer stands." A home, food, safety, in exchange for a child. As Maria looked at the ranch, warmth curling from the chimney, she felt the truth settle in her bones. This choice could save her life, or break what little was left of it. Maria did not sleep well that night at Hayes Ridge. The bed was soft, the blankets thick, and the room warm, yet her mind would not rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fire climbing walls that no longer existed, and heard her son crying out for her from somewhere she could not reach. When she woke before dawn, her hands were clenched tight against her chest, and her throat ached as if she had been screaming. She sat up slowly and looked around the small guest room Hannah had prepared for her. A braided rug lay on the floor. A wash basin stood near the window. A quilt, stitched with careful hands, covered the bed. It was kindness in every corner, and that kindness frightened her more than the cold barn ever had. Kindness came with expectations. Kindness asked for things in return. Outside, the ranch was already alive. Horses snorted. Men called out to one another. The sound of work settled over the land like a steady drumbeat. Maria dressed quietly and stepped onto the porch. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of grass and animals and bread baking somewhere inside the house. Hannah spotted her first. She was carrying a basket of eggs, her face bright despite the early hour. "You're up early," Hannah said with a smile. "I'm used to it," Maria replied. "My husband worked before sunrise." Hannah nodded, her smile softening. "You can help me with breakfast if you like, or you can rest." "I'd rather help," Maria said. "I don't sit well with doing nothing." Hannah's eyes warmed. "I thought so." In the kitchen, Maria moved without being asked. She peeled potatoes, sliced bread, stirred pots. Her hands remembered the rhythm of feeding a family. The work steadied her breathing and quieted her thoughts. When Colton entered, freshly washed and smelling of soap and dust, he stopped for a moment, watching her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," Maria answered, not looking up. "I wanted to." He nodded once and sat at the table. They ate in near silence. It was not awkward, but it was heavy. Each scrape of a fork sounded loud. When the meal ended, Colton stood. "I have work to do," he said. "You can stay today. Look around. Talk to Hannah. There's no pressure." Quote. Maria met his eyes. There's always pressure. He did not deny it. As the day unfolded, Maria walked the ranch with Hannah. She met families who lived in small houses scattered across the land. Women smiled kindly. Children stared at her with open curiosity. She helped hang laundry and mend a torn shirt for one of the ranch hands. No one asked her questions, but she felt their eyes weighing her, measuring where she might fit. By afternoon, she realized something unsettling. The ranch did not feel lonely. It felt full of life, full of people who depended on Colton. He was not just a man seeking an heir. He was the center of a world that kept many others standing. That truth made her choice heavier. Late that evening, Colton found her sitting on the fence overlooking the west pasture. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in long bands of gold and red. "You didn't run," he said. "I thought about it," Maria replied honestly. "So did I," he said, "about letting you go." She turned to face him. "Why didn't you?" Because I don't believe in wasting time, Colton said. And neither do you. Silence stretched between them. I lost my wife 6 years ago, he said quietly. She died giving birth to a child who never lived. The doctor told me afterward that I would never have children. Something wrong inside me. The ranch didn't care. The land didn't care. But the future did. Maria's breath caught. You never told me that. I didn't need to, he said. My need remains the same. You're asking me to give you something you cannot give yourself, she said. Yes. And if I fail, she said, voice shaking, I am sent away. I will not throw you into the cold, he replied, but I will not lie to you either. She stared at the pasture. My son died in my arms, she whispered. I buried him with my own hands. You are asking me to open that wound and risk losing again. Colton's jaw tightened. I am. That night, Maria prayed longer than she had in weeks. She did not ask for guidance. She asked for strength. The next morning, she made her decision. She found Colton near the barn, giving orders. He dismissed the men when he saw her coming. I will marry you, she said before fear could stop her. But not as a vessel, not as a thing. He studied her, explained. I will work beside you, she said. I will care for this ranch as if it were my own. I will try to give you a child. But if God decides otherwise, I will not be cast aside like a broken tool. Colton was silent for a long moment. I cannot promise you forever, he said finally. But I can promise you respect, and safety, and honesty. That will have to be enough, Maria said. They were married 3 days later. The ceremony was small. The preacher spoke softly. Hannah cried. Maria wore a simple blue dress borrowed from one of the ranch wives. Colton stood stiff beside her, his hand firm around hers. There was no kiss full of hope, only a careful one full of intention. Married life was not warm at first. They slept in the same bed but faced opposite walls. They spoke mostly of work. Maria learned quickly. She tracked accounts, organized supplies, soothed tempers. The ranch began to run smoother. People noticed. At night, Colton would sometimes sit by the fire, staring into the flames. Maria learned when to speak and when to leave him alone. Slowly, something like trust began to grow, fragile but real. Weeks passed. Then, months. When Maria became ill in the mornings, she said nothing at first. She was afraid to name it, afraid to hope. When the doctor finally confirmed it, her hands trembled. She told Colton at supper. He froze, then stood abruptly, chair scraping back. Are you certain? He asked. The doctor nodded. As certain as I can be. Colton left the room without a word. Maria sat alone, tears slipping silently down her face, unsure whether she had just secured her place or sealed her fate. Outside, Colton stood under the open sky, breathing hard. For the first time in years, fear overtook him. Not fear of loss, but fear of wanting something too much. Because now it was no longer just an heir he was waiting for. It was her. Winter came early to Hayes Ridge, settling over the land with a quiet firmness that left no room for argument. Frost coated the fence posts each morning, and the wind cut sharper than it had in months. Maria felt the cold differently now. It seemed to reach deeper, into her bones, into the life growing inside her. Each step reminded her that nothing was guaranteed. Not the child. Not her place. Not the fragile peace she had begun to feel. Colton changed after the doctor's visit. Not in loud ways, not in anger or celebration, but in silence. He watched her more closely. He asked questions he had never asked before. Had she eaten enough? Was she resting? Did she feel pain? His concern unsettled her. It felt too close to hope, and hope had hurt her once beyond repair. The ranch hands noticed it too. They spoke softer around her. The women brought soups and blankets without being asked. Hannah rarely left Maria's side, her excitement bright and impossible to hide. "You'll be a good mother," Hannah said one evening as they folded laundry near the fire. Maria's hands paused. "I was one," she said quietly. "That doesn't mean I get to be one again." Quote. Hannah looked at her with wide eyes, then nodded, understanding more than her years suggested. She reached out and squeezed Maria's hand, saying nothing more. As the months passed, Maria grew stronger in her role at the ranch. She balanced ledgers, resolved disputes, and earned the respect of people who had once only watched her from a distance. Colton relied on her in ways he had not expected. He began asking her opinion before making decisions. Sometimes, late at night, they would sit across from one another at the table, speaking of crops, weather, and the future, without realizing how natural it felt. Yet something remained between them, unspoken and heavy. The night the pains began, the wind howled like a warning. Maria woke with a sharp ache low in her belly, fear rising fast in her throat. She pressed her hand against herself, whispering prayers she barely remembered. By dawn, the doctor was called. The labor was long and cruel. Maria screamed into pillows and clawed at the sheets, memories of her first childbirth crashing over her. Fire, smoke, loss. She begged God not to take this child too. Not again. Colton paced the hall like a trapped animal, every cry cut into him. For the first time, he realized how deeply he had tied his future to her breath, her strength, her survival. When the cry finally came, thin but fierce, the doctor emerged with a solemn face. "It's a girl," he said. Silence fell hard. Maria's heart dropped. She turned her face away, tears streaming silently. She had done what she could. She had given life. But it was not what Colton wanted. The doctor cleared his throat. "The mother is weak, but she will recover. The child is strong." Colton stood very still. He walked into the room slowly and looked at the tiny bundle in Maria's arms. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, her eyes tightly shut, her fists clenched, like she was already fighting the world. "She's beautiful," Maria whispered, unable to stop herself. Colton swallowed. He felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had kept sealed for years. "She is," he said. Weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and soft cries. Colton held the baby often, though he told himself it was temporary. He named her Grace, without discussion, without thinking. The name felt right. Maria watched him closely. She saw the way his hand lingered when he passed the cradle, the way his voice softened when he spoke to the child, and she waited for the other thing, the ending. One evening, after Grace had fallen asleep, Colton spoke. "You know the agreement," he said. Maria nodded, her chest tight. "I do." He stared into the fire. "I told you I needed a son." "Yes. And you gave me a daughter." She said nothing. There was nothing left to say. "I was wrong," Colton said quietly. Her head snapped up. "I thought legacy was land and blood and names," he continued. "But watching you nearly die, watching her breathe, I realized something." He turned to her, eyes raw and honest. "I don't want to lose you." The words landed softly, but carried more weight than any promise he had made before. "I don't care if she is a girl," he said. "I don't care if she is the only child I ever have. She is mine. And so are you if you'll stay." Maria's breath caught painfully. "Colton, I never wanted to trap you." "You didn't," he said. "I trapped myself with fear. You gave me something I didn't know how to ask for." She looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully between them. "I won't stay if I'm only tolerated." He reached for her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Then stay because you are wanted." The winter passed. The ranch thrived. Grace grew strong. Laughter returned to the house, slow at first, then fuller. Maria felt something healing inside her that she thought had burned away forever. One spring morning, Colton watched Maria walk across the field with Grace in her arms, sunlight catching in her hair. He realized then that the home he had been searching for had never been about heirs. It had been about finding someone who would not leave. And Maria, once homeless and broken, finally stood in a place where she belonged, not because of a bargain, but because love had quietly taken root where survival once stood. The wind still rolled across the plains, but now it carried something else: hope. Spring settled fully over Hayes Ridge, softening the land and easing wounds that winter had pressed too hard. The grass returned in patient waves, green and forgiving, and the cattle moved slower now, heavy with calm. Maria often stood on the porch in the early mornings with Grace held close against her chest, watching the sun lift itself over the plains. Each sunrise felt like proof that she had survived something meant to break her. Grace grew quickly. Her cries grew stronger, her fingers more curious. She smiled early, wide, and fearless, as if she had already decided the world was worth trusting. The ranch hands doted on her without shame. Even the hardest men softened when she was near, lowering their voices, offering awkward smiles. She belonged to them all in a way Maria had not expected. Colton changed too, though he never spoke of it. He rose earlier, came home earlier. He held Grace without hesitation now, rocking her by the fire in the evenings. Sometimes Maria would catch him staring at the child with a look that startled her. It was not pride. It was gratitude, mixed with fear, as if he understood how close he had come to losing everything before realizing what mattered. One evening, months after Grace's birth, Maria found Colton sitting alone at the kitchen table long after supper had ended. A single lamp burned low. His hands were folded, still, heavy with thought. "You're quiet," she said. "So are you," he replied. She sat across from him. The silence between them no longer felt sharp. It felt earned. "I never asked you," Maria said carefully, "if you regret it, not having a son." Colton looked at her for a long moment. "I regret the man I was when I thought that was all that mattered." She nodded. "I was afraid you'd wake up one day and decide the bargain wasn't worth it." "I was afraid too," he admitted, "not of the bargain, of caring more than I planned to." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I didn't marry you to be loved," she said softly. "But I stayed because I felt seen." Quote. He squeezed her hand gently. "I didn't marry you to love you either," he said, "but loving you happened anyway." That summer, the ranch faced trouble. A drought settled in, slow and merciless. Water ran low. Crops suffered. Tension crept back into the air. Colton worked longer hours, shoulders tight with worry. Maria stood beside him through it all, rationing supplies, calming fears, making choices that carried weight. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance without rain to follow, Colton finally broke. "If this land fails," he said quietly, "I fail everyone." Maria looked at him steadily. "Then we fail together." The rain came a week later, sudden and heavy, drenching the plains and washing the dust from the air. People laughed openly when it fell. Faces turned skyward. Grace squealed at the sound of it, her tiny hands clapping without knowing why. Life did not become perfect. It became real. Years passed. Grace learned to walk between fence posts and learned to speak by calling for her father first, then her mother. She grew into the ranch as if she had been born for it. She rode horses before she could write her name and asked endless questions about the land, about people, about why the sky changed colors at night. Maria healed in ways she had once thought impossible. The sharp edge of her grief dulled. Her memories of her first child no longer burned. They ached, but gently now, like something held with care. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped low and Grace played nearby, Colton spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the agreement." Maria stiffened slightly, old fears rising. "I want to end it," he said. She turned to him. "End it?" Quote, "There is no bargain anymore," he said firmly. "No condition, no deadline. You are my wife because I choose you. Grace is my child because she is mine. That's it." Tears filled Maria's eyes before she could stop them. "I stayed because I needed a home," she whispered, "and I needed someone who wouldn't leave," he said. "Seems we both got more than we asked for." They stood together watching Grace chase fireflies as the sky darkened. Her laughter rang out across the land, clear and free. Years later, people would speak of Hayes Ridge with quiet respect, not because of its size, but because of the family that held it together. They would say the ranch thrived, not under a man's strength alone, but under a woman's steadiness and a child's joy. Maria Dawson, once homeless and broken, had found more than shelter. She had found permanence. Not because she gave someone an heir, but because she gave her heart when she thought she had none left to give. And Colton Hayes, once afraid of being alone, learned that legacy was not measured by sons or names carved into wood. It was measured by who stayed when leaving would have been easier. As the wind moved across the plains, it no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like peace.